Oh, hi, I'm Bob Mover, and I welcome you to On the Real Side, podcast that we do. I'm very, very happy once again, to have my friend and one of the great musicians of our time, Mr. Dave Liebman, with us today. Hi, Dave.
Hey Bob, how you doing?
I'm very happy because you're here.
Well, pleasure is mine.
And we did a podcast last week, and we had such a good time, and we talked about so much that we said, well, we should really do part two because there's so much more to get to. Dave didn't even get to Miles yet, so you know, uh, Oh, I had this dream, by the way. I had a funny dream last night about you and me, and it's weird because I rarely dream of living people. Most of my dreams involve my friends who have departed this world for some reason. Once in a while I get a dream of a living person. So it's a very short dream. I won't go on too long, but it was a funny dream. You were going to take me out to lunch, Dave, and we were in a place with palm trees. It looked like Miami or somewhere like that. And we went to lunch, and Karis dropped us off in a car, and she let us both out, and she took the car somewhere and came back later to pick us up. And we went to this restaurant that you insisted was very good, and you wanted to take me to lunch. You were very adamant about that. I was your guest. And it turned out to be in a bookstore in a mall outside, but there were books all around us. And we were eating this lunch. The food was very good. You were right. And I was very happy that you'd taken me to lunch. So I said, gee, we're in a bookstore. I think I'll get a book. I'll buy Dave a book. So I bought you a book. I don't know what book I bought you. But then she picked us up. Karis came and picked us up. And we said, we ought to make this a tradition. I said, next time I'll buy lunch. And he said, and I'll buy the book. And that was our dream. So
Nice, nice no harm dream. Nothing.
so,
Thank you, sir, to be included in your nighttime.
well, I took it to interpret. I interpreted it as being that we're both hungry for knowledge.
Yeah, I'll take that. That's true. That's true.
And on that note, I got so many questions to ask you. I was thinking about, spiritual practices and things like that. Like I remember when you had Lookout Farm right after you left Miles. And one of the things that made Lookout Farm different than a lot of bands was that you used Badal Roy and the tablas. And I was just wondering what were you getting into Indian? I know that were you influenced perhaps by Coltrane to get into it? I mean, as a lot of people started listening to Indian music and everything, but what led you to that idea, and what were your own spiritual practices? Were they at all affected by Eastern thought? And I just wanted to ask you that.
Well, I like to think that it came from me and was therefore on the map already. But I can't tell you where I got interested in it. I can from, 75, 76 would qualify, I guess. I moved to California in 76 it ended up to be a year and a half. It was ostensibly to form a band with Pee Wee Ellis, Ellis Liebman band, but that's another story.
And for those who don't know Pee Wee Ellis, he's most famous for being with James Brown, along with Maceo and that band, right, Dave?
Yes, Maceo and the trombone player, I forget. Anyway, Fred Wesley. Yeah. And in California, I had gotten interested in Bansari flute, the long wooden flute. I took lessons for a year with a student of Ali Akbar Khan's, and of course I included it. I thought I should include it. I mean, Miles is the first to really, in a certain way, first to call the shots as far as people coming into the band on exotic instruments, like the Naierto and there was usually somebody playing percussion or kungoods or something like that.
Right, I remember that.
So me following the lead said when I formed my own band, see if I can find a way to put this in there, because it was exotic at that time. It was exotic in world music. I mean, nobody even knew what that was, of course.
Yeah, that's why I found it very innovative. When I heard that band and you were using the tablas, I said, you know,
Yeah, I mean, the main thing was to, make room for him and everything, and volume was a consideration. There were things of considerations. And also, my idea of being an Indian flute player quickly evaporated after the first few lessons, when all you do is play the root with a shruti box.
that's it.
You play the root for 4 hours or something like
I
that. That's the sa. And then from there, it works its way up a scale, up to any scale in particular, too. It's very interesting. And of course, it's Indian music, just in the landscape, is, in my opinion, the heaviest music that we have created on this planet. Even without harmony, that's really just the rhythm and the melody. Harmony is accessory, and it's complicated, it's peaceful, it's obviously spiritual, it's got a lot going for it. So I thought to throw it in the band. Can't go wrong. Put the blessings on it.
got that, yeah, and right around that time, because this is around the time we practiced together in Brazil. Dave came down to Brazil, and I spent 7 months in Brazil in '74. And this was one of your last gigs with Miles. And I believe right after that, he kind of disbanded. So, you were about to leave Miles when we met. We knew each other in New York. As I think Mike Brecker told you, I was down in Brazil. And then you called me, and we practiced and had a beautiful day together. And then, I think and we had some dinner. And then I came to the Miles concert with you, and met Miles, the only time I met him, so I remember it well. But before the concert, we went over to your hotel room while you prepared, and you played me some of this record you've been making called Drum Ode. And that kind of reflected your fascination with rhythm. And we talked about rhythm, while you were getting ready for the gig, and we were listening to this music together. And then shortly after that, I think you were probably into the Indian rhythms and exotic rhythms. Is that what was talk about your fascination with rhythm, and how you feel about that, because that's such an important part of you.
And I played drums, and I always enjoyed the rhythm. I mean, that's Drum Ode opens with drummers, and it's a love call to drummers. And on Drum Ode, you have a couple of different styles being played. So I thought it was appropriate. Also, the times we were living in musically, fusion was the name of the game, and fusion in its most positive and most negative ways. But this was an attempt to try to be on top of the scene as it was being created. The Herbie's band, Return to Forever, Mahavishnu, Gafam, even Weather Report, of course. I felt that I came out of Miles Davis. I owe it to Miles and to people to do something on my own that reflects my time with Miles.
Yeah, that was an interesting aspect of your musical personality to me, that somehow you managed to be with the times and kind of trendy without being commercial. So that was an interesting place to be.
A hard trick, I'm telling you.
What?
It's a hard one because you can easily err on the side of caution or of abundance, and it's really once you start mixing and match, it's like a recipe. You put more sugar in, you put less sugar in, and the same here. Put more drums in, less drums in. In a way, you're making a meal every time you play, of mixture, a mixture of different elements, and modern elements, and in some cases. But here in this Indian situation, world music was the reason.
Well, and so much of that came. I mean, you probably would have gotten to it anyway, but I think you're going in that direction was kind of hastened by your relationship with Miles. Can we talk a little bit about how'd you meet Miles and how'd you get the gig, and just some experiences you might have had with Miles?
Well, this is the subject of a book I wrote years ago on my relationship with Miles. I mean, it's where to start and where to end, I don't know. But in general, where I was living was a loft on West 19th Street. And it was 3 floors empty when I moved in. It happened to be that the landlord's name was Liebman, just by complete coincidence. And so I took the first floor, which had been a shirt dye factory. The guys had, shirts, tie-dye shirts all over the floor when I moved in. But what happened?
Shirts themselves. or like on the floor.
Well, yeah, they just left it in the middle of, you know. So I took a staple gun. I went and bought a staple gun, and I put all the shit into the ceiling. So the people who know my loft from that time remember the ceiling because it was all multicolored with tie-dye shirts.
Now that's not the loft that Brecker took later.
Record took that loft, yes.
Okay, so I knew that loft, but I knew it after you had been there. I started going there when Mike and I were hanging out, which is a little bit. You had gone elsewhere in the city, but
Yeah,
that loft became Mike's loft.
those first 10 years, I had 4 lofts.
Ah,
I was moving a lot, you know, landlord trouble, just a desire to change, whatever, a variety of things. But you're right about that. I mean, Miles was a big influence for being Miles and thinking of, you know, his career and his music and his contribution. Uh, it was awesome. And when I figured that when somebody leaves Miles, they have to come up with something that's theirs.
that's true. And
And
but how did you, in other words, just how did you get to meet Miles, and how did you kind of get on that band?
well,
What?
the Dave Holland, I went to Europe in '67 for the summer. My parents gave me $1,000 and said, "There's a book called Europe on $5 a day,
I
which
remember that book.
will get you through."
I remember that. Break my mind.
Well, student hostels and like, you know, weird hotels and shit. But you know, it was '67, '68. But there, one of the phone numbers, thanks to Cameron Brown, who gave me some phone numbers, was Dave Holland and John Sermon. So I stayed with them for 3 weeks,
Ah,
and of course, then when we got back to New York, I got a phone call, and it's Dave Holland. I said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I'm in the airport." Well, I think it was. I might get this. I might get it a little wrong, but he said, I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm playing with Miles Davis tonight at the Coronet." I said, "What?" He said, "No." He came into Ronnie Scott's. He saw me playing with a singer. He said, "I'm sending you a ticket tomorrow. You come by. You come to the. You know, by plane." So that was Dave, and so that was '67. So he now in '68 was living in the same building as I was. And then one day he says to me, he says, "Chick Corea is getting divorced." I said, let's go out commensurate with him. So he lived in Queens Village, or Middle Village, I forget, you know. And
and you had known Chick previously as well.
no, I had not known Chick.
Or you not known
I
Chick?
did get to know him now. You know,
Right. I see.
yeah. So that's how the building became stacked with Miles Davis as sidemen. And me, not yet. That's me. It's off by, I got in there at '73. So this is '71, and '70 and '71, really like that. And Miles, you know, so I went to the gigs. I heard the gig. We had Miles over for rice and vegetables. We had a dinner with him, Chick and me and Dave. And so that's how I got. In those days, you know, when you hang out with somebody, they know you by face. They don't know your name, but they know you by face. And then they go, you're that guy who plays, or you know, you're hanging around. What do you want? You know, et cetera, et cetera. There was a much smaller scene as far as numbers go of participants in the jazz scene in New York City at that time.
Yeah, that's true. You know, and I think with so many cats around now, the competitiveness, you know, which is something I was going to talk about with you too, it kind of overrules the beauty of the friendship aspect that we all had. It was not like that competitiveness didn't exist. But you know, last night a friend of mine came over, and he spent the night, and he's not, you know, he's a an amateur musician, but a buddy, and he's a hell of a backgammon player. And I like to play backgammon, and I often beat my friends at the game. But this cat, man, I just can't get around his way of playing. He kills me every time. So I came in at 3 o'clock in the morning after being up all night playing backgammon with him. My wife said, "How'd you do?" I said, "Well, yeah, he killed me. He killed me." She said, "You had to surrender?" I said, "I surrendered like Custer surrendered Little Bighorn." I mean, it was beyond surrender. So I started to think about different cats in those days and the attitudes that people had toward competition with each other. And I found that, you know, there was a whole group of guys that you were sort of the Al Cohn of your time, in the sense that whenever I talked to the Prez tenor player faction, Stan Getz and Zoot and Al and Richie Kimuka, I became friends with all those guys when I was in my teens. And they always said that Al was sort of the hub of everything. And then years, you know, that we all played this style and we all were into this, but Al was the man. That way, he was our mentor in certain ways. And it was funny because there was a parallel to me with you and Al Cohn that I found that when I talked to Mike Brecker and Jerry Bergonzi and Bob Berg and, the cats that were playing in that particular vein, Grossman, of course, that, you were kind of a mentor to all of them. You were sort of like, I felt that you had that kind of stature among the cats that way. And the competitiveness. So I knew that certain cats, you never competed. When I played with you, when we would play together, I never felt that you were out to scout me, to take no prisoners. You were very, very gentle, and we had the few times we got to play, you would play counterpoint, and I never had the feeling that you wanted to go home and make me cry. Bob Berg, on the other hand.
Well, let's talk about those who have passed with kindness.
No, I am talking about him with kindness because I loved him, and he loved me, and that was the beauty of it, that we were real buddies. And he got on the bandstand, and it was like, we're not buddies now, baby. Like I'm going to make you cry. Bob was like, and we would have some good battles. Ronnie Cubert was like that. He took no prisoners too. But you and Mike Brecker and Jerry Bergonzi were kind of, for me, the gentler guys as far as competitiveness was concerned. But my question to you, and Grossman, of course, was in a world by himself that way. How do you feel about that competitiveness in the music? And did you have some experiences? I mean, I do remember one time when Ronnie Cubert played so well on Donna Lee. I had been sitting in the club all night listening to him and Tom Harrell, and my horn was around the corner at my house. I lived a few blocks from Sweet Basil. And they said, hey, why don't you come by and play the last set? Go get your horn. And I shouldn't have. I've been drinking and other things all night. I was sitting there, and I said, sure, I'll go up. And Ronnie goes, first tune. And just my tears were almost coming down my face. He was beating me up so bad. And that rarely happened to me, but it has. So I'm talking too much, but have you had experiences and felt some competitiveness from people, and how do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, it's only human to compete. I mean, it's a human tendency, and it has its purpose. First of all, you hear somebody else who may be at the top of their game more than you are, because if you can go to a jam session and you play better than the last guy playing, it's not good. He should be better than you. And you can tell this in 10 seconds when you walk into a club or you hear somebody play. Now, I was fortunate to have Elvin and then Miles. I had a 4-year period with Masters. So in a certain way, I was untouchable. Because
in that sense, untouchable.
I served my time with the top guys in the world. And that kind of put me in a category of my own with Steve. But Steve was, he had such a dossier that it was impossible to be a steady influence. He was an incredible prodigy. But anyway, so with that said, it's a learning tool when it's done positively. That's all I can say. If it's done in a positive spirit, and I'm like, can you show me what you just did? That kind of vibe. If you can do that, it's useful to have a quote competitive attitude. But basically, I don't think it's a real scene, and usually it's the untalented who are competitive.
I think that's very true. And but when I'm talking to the young guys around now, I feel that that there's a little bit more competition with each other because there's more cats and less of a scene. That when we were around, it was like there was a lot of food musically for everybody, so we could all be buddies. And not really, and we were happy if somebody got a gig.
Right.
You wanted it, they got it. That's good. I'm glad. And I just.
When Gene Perla got the gig with Elvin, our community of musicians, 20 of us, so applauded that with great enthusiasm because that was one of our guys going with one of the greatest drummer ever lived. That was a big thing. He said to me, I'm going to get you on the gig, and then Steve, and he did. He did. I took Joe Farrell's place, basically, and Steve came in later. He came in about after 6 months that I was with Miles.
So you got the gig through Gene?
Basically, yes. Well, it's dramatic because talking about competitive. Um, the phone rang late at night, like about 11:30 or so, and it was Gene, and he said, "Elvin wants to hear you right now." And they were at Slugs, which
Right now.
we all remember. So I walk in, I'm first of all, I don't know what to expect, but since I knew that Gene was pushing us, I guess it was something to do with playing your best and getting through this examination coming up. So I walk in and nobody's there. It's midnight, 12 o'clock. He says, then he looks at me and goes, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" What a great way to greet. He said, "No, this is Elvin."
Elvin said it to you. Are you ready?
He was at the bar with Joe Farrell. And I looked, I don't know what I did. I said, "Yeah, sure, whatever." He said, "Get your horn out." So I went up and we played Softly, Yesterday's a Night in Tunisia. About 20 minutes worth of music.
A lot of minor.
C minor, whatever, It's funny because with La Roca, I got the gig when I played Softly as Morning Sunrise with Swallow and Chick, 2 years earlier. But in any case, then he said, well, I think I played, Softly, and then I think, I don't know, Yesterday, something like that. And then he said, "I heard enough." He said, "Do you know where Rudy Van Gelder's studio is?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Be there at 10 o'clock next Thursday and bring a tune."
And bring what?
Bring a tune.
I'll bring a tune.
Yeah, which I did, called Slumber. One of my first.
And who was on this particular record? It wasn't Farrell. So Joe was playing this night too. That you first sat in with Elvin, right?
Joe, Frank Forster, and myself.
And right, of course.
Yes. And so that's how the gig. Anyway, that's Elvin. But going to Miles is another story. But
what's the name of that record that you ended up doing with Elvin? The one in that first record.
Genesis, Blue Note.
Genesis, just so if people want to chase that one down. That's
a lot of reverb on there. I think it was Moody's and Shook or something like that.
And that's so. And then that led to a period of 2 years or so with Elvin, right?
Right, a little less than 2. And Miles's thing is a little more direct. I got a phone call. My mother was on the line. I was in the doctor's office, I was in the doctor's office, and she said somebody named Tayo Machero. She completely.
Yeah, Tayo Machero.
I said, what? He said to come to the studio to record immediately. Another one of those last minute jobs. So now I'm on 52nd and Madison. And I got to get to 31st into where the church is, where Miles recorded.
And Miles heard you yet? Now, Miles, you.
I don't think he had heard me. No, because no, he didn't hear me. But he heard about me, and it seems like Steve should have been there, and he wasn't there. That's why the last minute. So ostensibly, that's what I understood. So he kind of in a similar way. I played, and he asked me about that, and he said, then that was it. I didn't see him for 6 months. I came and I sat in a little bit. I didn't expect to be in the band. I didn't know what was happening. But same thing. Phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning. Keiko. She said, "Elvin wants you now. You're gonna take a ticket. There'll be a ticket waiting for you at LaGuardia, and you're gonna come in. We're playing in Chicago at a noon concert." So the phone was very instrumental in getting me my gigs.
The telephone was instrumental for all of us. Judson and a lot of cats had that answering service. What was it, Judson 24500? Remember, everybody? Because there were no answering machines yet. And, and so everybody had a certain service number, because if you weren't home, nobody was going to answer the phone or tell you who called. So you had to call the service. That was how I remember it being.
Guys paid for that. That was the guys who did studio work. They had
Yeah, I never had that, but I mean, I knew cats that did. And, first answering machine I ever heard. This is a funny story. I met Paul Bley one day when they used to have these things at the Union on Wednesday afternoons. And at Roseland, all the musicians would meet, different sizes. You'd have the Latin Club Day guys in one corner, the Jewish Club Day guys in another corner. You'd have the Italians, it was mostly ethnic, Then in certain corner, far away from everybody, was the jazz musicians corner.
Yes,
exactly. So, But you'd run into people, I ran into Konitz would go there sometimes to try to pick up a club day because everybody needed money and there wasn't a lot of gigs. So one day I see somebody in there and it's Paul Bley because I recognize him from pictures. I'd never met him before. So I go up to Bley and I said, "Oh, you're Paul Bley." We start talking and we had this interesting conversation where he said, people say to play to create. Have you ever thought about playing to destroy? And that's a typical Bley thought, right?
He was Mr. Contrary.
Mr. Contrary, exactly. He's my daughter's godfather too. We became very close, but and never. Anyway, that's my story. I'll tell that some other time. But the story about the answering machine always cracked me up because it turned out he lived on Jane Street and I lived on Thompson Street, so we weren't far from each other, and we had a nice talk in there. And he said, "Here's my number. Give me a call sometime. We'll go out for a glass of wine or hang out." So a week or so passed, and one day I'm sitting around and I'm finished practicing for the moment. And, I say, "Oh, maybe I'll give Bley a call and go out and see if he wants to have a taste, So I call him up and I hear, "Hello." I say, "Oh, Paul, hi, this is Bob Mover. We met the other day at the Union." "Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. And, you mentioned that maybe we could hang out a little bit and, "Oh, sure. Yeah, huh. Uh-huh." And then it said, "You have been talking to a machine."
AI now.
If you wish to talk to the real Paul Bley, leave a number at the beep tone.
That sounds like Paul.
Thank you, right? That was typical Bley. So did you get to play with him much or talk with him much? Did you have some experience of Paul?
Not really, but he did. When I was playing, he would come and listen. He'd be there at least one of the 6 nights. And, this is with Elvin and Miles to a lesser degree, but with Elvin, he would come and say hi and, small talk.
Right. I see. Yeah. I mean,
but by the way, another Jewish horn player, Lee
Kodas, yeah.
Add him to the list.
What was that name? I'm sorry.
Add Lee to the list of alto players, saxophone players, Jewish saxophone players.
Jewish saxophone players. There's a lot of us.
Yeah.
By the way, the other day was July 25th, and I don't go to Facebook regularly, but now once in a while I do, and I happened to notice that, man, July 25th was the birthday of Johnny Hodges, Charles McPherson, Richie Kamuka, Steve Lacy, Richie Perry, and those were 5 saxophone players, all born on that day. And I think there's one other or two that I missed. So that means nothing, but I just thought I'd say that. I also wanted to tell you about something I heard you play one night that I really enjoyed. When you were in Boston, and the one night I sat in with Elvin at the Jazz Workshop, Paul's Mall, you did a version of "I'm a Fool to Want You."
Right.
That was so beautiful.
That was the tempo that you had real trouble with Elvin because he played so soft. He just slid that brush over the skin, and you had to really listen hard to get the beat because he would explode. You'd hear the explosions, they're like bar 16 and going to whatever, but he would explode. But as far as that ballad tempo and texture, that was the tune that was my ballad, obviously, and he played so soft. I use that as an example of somebody who had such a range. We always identify Elvin with fire and all that.
Well,
stuff.
I think that's what knocked me out so much because in our sessions when we jam and play with all these, with Berg and Brecker and everybody was mostly fast tempos and energy. It's all about energy, and I'd never heard you play like quietly and softly with such and maintain the energy. To me, the challenge of a ballad is to keep that same energy that you would have in an up tempo, but to have it in a more subtle fashion, and I didn't know you could do that at the time. I figured you could probably, but I'd never heard you do that like that.
You're such a hard listener that I'm sure it was. I go along with your observations.
Well, oh yeah, no, I did really listen to you, and one thing I was thinking too was with Miles. I think that you probably have some stories like this, but the few things I've heard, he was a hilarious cat.
He
It
could
seemed
be.
that he had a sense of humor in a certain way. Walter Davis told me a story about Herbie. One night, Herbie is playing, and he's got a 9-foot Bosendorfer in Germany, and he's playing and playing and playing, and he's eating that piano up, and just playing amazing stuff, and he's playing a long solo, and he's really getting into it. And Miles walks over, whispers something in his ear, and he takes out his solo. He stops, didn't stop playing, but he went to the next guy. And later on, Ron says to him, "Hey, what did Miles say to you? You were into it, and then all of a sudden you stopped. What was it he said? He said to me, 'It's only my funny Valentine.'"
Cryptic as usual. He would keep you off balance. Miles' whole job in life, as far as human being goes, was to keep you off balance. You're going somewhere, you're heading there, and suddenly he pulls the rug out onto you. I mean, once you understand his game, it's actually very funny and humorous and caustic. It can be, and it had a bite to it. His observations, he would say certain things here and there. He hardly talked about the music to me or to anybody.
He'd have you what? I'm sorry.
Hardly talked about the music in general. He was a kind of a, I don't know the word. He was a sorcerer at certain things. I mean, Prince of Darkness and all that, but the way his ability to communicate what he wanted was really pretty impressive. He wanted something from you. You didn't know what he wanted, but by nuance, by looking at you, you could say, "I guess he wants me to do this because I'm doing that." I don't know. I just figured it out to get through survival. I had to figure something out to explain it to myself so I could play better.
Huh. Yeah, well, maybe that's a real level of creation. I used to carry a little piece of paper with a Samuel Beckett quote from one of his books called Malloy. And in the book, the guy has run into a ditch, and he's trying he's at a moment, he's got his bicycle, and in one of those Beckett situations, Samuel Beckett, he's trying to get out, and he says, to paraphrase him, he says he didn't know what to say. And it was not to want to say, not to know what it is you want to say, not to know what it is you think you might want to say, but yet never to stop saying, or almost never. That is the thing to keep in mind, even in the heat of composition.
Yeah.
And, so I think that's sort of what you're saying in a way with what Miles was doing.
Well, this is all Blaze in that category, and Lee and everything. A lot of the white guys are in there, which is like Zen thinking, making you think about something that you shouldn't have to think about it. Or, now we could have a discussion about that. That's 10 years right there. But there was a certain sense of humor that the guys who came up in the 50s had, which was different from us. We already were a little more worldly because of the situation of transportation and communication, everything like that. Not a value judgment, just an observation.
No, in the sociological situation too, that at least racial things were starting to break through when we were coming up. That
I'm on the stage with black, red, green stripes on the equipment. That's the Black Panther. What do you call it? Drapes and I was the only white guy within miles, to put it lightly. And so this is another topic, of course, but those guys had a sense of humor which was pared down to like 2 words sometimes. I'm sure you had it with Lee because he was like that also. And Blaze the chief of that shit.
Yeah, he had a lot of those things. I mean, I know one other Miles story that Mike Stern told me, which is like illustrates this type of attitude. Mike had been Mike had a lot of substance abuse issues. Yeah. And to the point where we were worried about him. We didn't know how long he was going to make it because he was so seriously abusing himself. And he wouldn't mind me saying this because he talks about it. But he was at a point. So then he joined Miles and he cleaned up. He went to Narcotics Anonymous and that really helped him clean up and everything. So, but Mike was a very intricate player, right? And brilliant, but I used to practice with him too. And he would always show me these complicated intervallic things that I learned so much from. But so he's playing with Miles and he's going on one night with his intervallic stuff. and playing the hell out of everything, man, playing the shit out of things. And Miles walks over to him and says, "You ought to join NA, Notes Anonymous."
That's what I mean. That keeps you off balance. That's what I'm talking about.
That's what you were talking about. That type of thing.
That's not negative. It's just a very sparse way to look at what's funny, but also what's human. And I mean, not guys in the '60s. I'm generalizing, of course, but we go and explain the goddamn Bible because it was on the map. It was being requested. Jazz education, what we talked about earlier, the last time. There was a lot of room for black comedy among the people in the '60s, But the guy in the '50s is a different story, and it's a repression that was understood. It comes out of the black and white discussion, but it's something that could be discussed and was discussed, and I've had to talk about it on many occasions.
Well, I mean, it's good that you bring that up because I know that, the racial thing was really an issue, I would say, with our generation too, because we were in this generation, at least when Martin Luther King got assassinated. And in the midst of all the Black Power things, to be a white jazz musician was in somewhat, not to commend ourselves too highly, but it was somewhat of a courageous thing to try to be.
Well, I have a short story. My lady at the time was Elena Steinberg. She was anyway, she was with me with Miles anyway, and she said that he said to him one day, he said, the guys don't like him, Dave. She said, well, why? He said, I don't know why, but as far as I'm concerned, Dave got no color.
You got what?
Got no color.
No color.
No color, which is a very neutral way of saying he's mature, hopefully. And I mean, he didn't address race issues except in interviews. I mean, he didn't say anything when we were on a bandstand or anything like that. And that was good PR because it excited everybody would come and see Miles more than hear him. They'd watch him. In fact, one day he said, why does he walk off the stage? He says, because the people will look at me and not at Tony or Wayne. And he's right, because he was dressed so sharp and he was so cool. He was the epitome of cool.
Well, he also understood in a positive way the showbiz aspect of things,
That's what I mean.
Like, I did a little tour once with Don Moyer of the Chicago Art Ensemble, was part of the band. And it was kind of a free-ish type of group I played with for a minute in Italy. And we're on tour, and Moyer and I got along very well. So I said to him, "What, Don, this thing with the costumes and the bones in your nose and the whole get up that the art ensemble was doing," I said, was it saying something politically? What was that about? And Don says, showbiz, man. It was showbiz. It was
the way they took it, they put it right into that realm. Spend all that time putting makeup on and getting those outfits to fit the right way after a gig. I mean, amazing dedication to that aspect of show business, which is style and flash.
Which is true. And I mean, in a certain way, Miles did that to some extent. He was a forerunner of that type of thing.
Of what Dizzy was a master of.
Oh, yes.
He was a master of just standing there and looking funny and interesting and everything like that. But these cats were right in the line of vaudeville and of comedy and everything. I mean, they were just coming right out of their gigs because people danced. We're talking about that today with Karis. People danced in that time.
That was a very important thing. And even in our generation, I mean, you and I, even playing a bar mitzvah at a Catskills, people were dancing. And that was an important part of it. I think it gave the feeling of the dance to the music, even if you were just playing, the cigarette that bears the lipstick traces. The people are loving each other, and you're feeling this feeling. You're making people closer.
Well, bebop kind of put the knife in the music prior to bebop. No attitude, just that once people heard Charlie Parker, it was hard to go back.
So that it's funny that I was told that Bird at Rockland Palace, I think it's called Bird at Rockland Palace, which is some of the best Bird there is. It's Bird live where he stretches out and plays. That was a dance. He was playing for a dance. And he doesn't play a lot of fast tunes on that, but he plays nice bounceable tempos and he stretch it out and sounding great. And I hadn't realized, but Walter Bishop told me that there was more dancing going on to bebop than you would have thought.
Exactly. Well, they didn't have video. That's the point. Everything had to, if it was going to be captured on tape, somebody had to show up with a really gigantic camera as big as the club. You know.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And there is that one thing of Disney's big band where they have the people jitterbugging. You've probably seen that on YouTube or something, which you see them. I think the band is playing like Things to Come or some up tempo thing, and these people are dancing and throwing each other all over the dance floor. It's pretty.
I wonder, Bob, did Lee ever talk about fast tempos?
Yes. When he talked about them, we talked about the long meter. And he wasn't the only one. Ira Sullivan had told me about that. And he said he didn't really like fast tempos as he got older.
Yes,
he found that there was no reason to show off like that. But yet when we talked about In a Lighter Vein, for example, which is that tune that he did with Kenton, that's quite bright. But he said he was never comfortable with fast tempos, and he was never comfortable playing the blues. And see, for me, those were two of the best things that he did. And when we play Baby Baby all the time, and Lee would stretch out on a blues and B flat, man, there was so much soul in what he would play. And I mean, it was all the elements that you need to play the blues. He had it. And same with the fast tempo. We play Cherokee or The Song Is You up tempo, and I had to hang on to my hat, to my pants, and fly with him. But he said the long meter was the trick to playing up tempos. Feeling that the deeper pocket, like instead of to feel that like that. Did he talk to you about tempos and stuff?
Oh, in his book, which inspired me, by the way, to write my book, bio, what it is.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Reading his book is fantastic, but he's very honest about a lot of things about, like he has some comments about Stan Getz, which I agreed with saxophone wise, like that high register that he plays, that kind of whang, it's hard to, I can't describe it. But he said in the book, he did say, I don't like fast tempos, and I don't like fast tempos either. And I've just felt a kinship, at least in that aspect.
I like fast tempos. I always somehow enjoyed a fast tempo. I mean, it's one thing I like. Oh, Lee's book, it's funny. I was talking frequently with Lee on the phone in those days, and I was also speaking frequently with Sonny Rollins. And Lee says one thing about Sonny, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's not completely kind. It's some reservation that he has about Sonny, and that not totally improvising or this and that. And Sonny says, what does he expect me to be? He says, like if you talk to somebody, you got to have some vocabulary. You can't just go and start off a conversation going hooga booga. It's vocabulary is part of it. And then I said, well, then Lee says this, and I read Sonny what he says, and Sonny goes, ooh, them's fighting words.
Talk about competition.
Yeah, right.
There's only one white saxophone player at a time. That's the point. If you're not that guy, you're not working.
Yeah, that's what Blay said. Paul Blay told me, Bobby, the way music business works, and there's only so many slots.
Yes, sir.
There's 5 slots for black saxophone players. There's 2 for white saxophone players. Right. And if you don't get that slot, you'll drift into obscurity forever.
Well, in New York, I always say New York has room for a lot of this stuff because it's big and has more musicians per square inch than anywhere in the world. There's nowhere in the world like that, just from the standpoint of numbers, especially now, of course. But I just thought it was interesting because I'm not, although I played his tempos, we did it with Quest, we used to do it, but I just was interested in what, and that stands out, that quote, that when he discussed that.
Well, the other thing though is, since we're talking about the idea of, if there's only 2 white saxophone players, the thing is that who would get the slots would often be the people with the large record companies. The record company backing you. and that kind of thing. And you could be equal. For instance, somebody like Warren Marsh,
Yeah.
who, for instance, Sonny Rollins told me was one of his very favorite tenor players.
Oh, God.
You know, he loved Warren.
I love him. He's completely cryptic. It's very
Right, right.
serious, and it's his thing is. I mean, if you want to talk about some music being spiritual, that is a guy who brings it up to that level.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, but yet, if you look at Warren's quote career, you know, I like to think, and I kind of fall in this, not intentionally, but in a way, I like to be being like this, and I think you're like this too. There's a career is part of it. You have to have a career because you got to put food on the table for your family, but it's more of a vocation. You know, a vocation is a need to do something.
Right.
So with Warren, I felt he had a strong vocation, but he didn't really have much of a career. Toward the end of his life, he had a little better. It went a little better for him. Got to go to Norway and, you know, and be accepted in certain parts of the world. But he was still cleaning swimming pools,
Yeah.
you know, in California. Toward the end of his life, he couldn't make enough money playing music all the time, and
It's unbelievable. I mean, he's so amazingly. It's complex, but it's very listenable, and his tone. What the hell did he put an alto mouthpiece on a tenor saxophone or what? You know, I don't know what he did.
yeah, and his tone, you know, got a little deeper as he got his later stuff. When he put that metal mouthpiece on, it changed from his old Brillhart. He used to play a Brillhart, and ah, you know, I think that, but that's an example of, like, I think Ornette once said that you should never confuse um, the music business with the business of music.
Well put.
And, you know, I think that Warren really took care of the business of music, but was not great at the music business, which brings me to you, Lieb. You know, one thing that I've always admired about you is that, you know, without sacrificing the music, and like I said, not being decidedly commercial or anything, you know, you've made a real good career with the music education, with the books you've published, and I'm sure Karis had quite a bit to do with that. So, well, give me an idea. You give us an idea of how you feel about the music business.
Well, I'll tell you, the best thing is the way I got into it, which was in 1980, 81. I was a little dismayed and discouraged about the business we're in. And it was not because it's nothing like Lee or like Warren or whatever, but it was like just that I felt I could do more for the world. And I had already been at the World Grand, but I had already seen Miles. I had played with Miles. I mean, my dossier was already full. And I was dismayed by the scene, by the way the scene worked. And I figured I'd like to do something else. I had other attributes that were not being satisfied, in my opinion, for myself. And my mother.
Such as, what was not being?
The very loose nature of the music, not of the music, but of the scene. You know what I mean? I mean, the negative side of what we described earlier with, you know, it's always remember the past, remember the good points. But, you know, a lot of the cats were tough to get through, and the competition, getting back to that, competition was rife. It was around, you know. Anyway, I took some steps. I went to the Peace Corps, and they didn't want a 5 or 10 year commitment.
Wait, you went to the where? I'm sorry.
To the Peace Corps.
The Peace Corps?
Peace Corps, Peace Corps, Peace. PEACE Corps. You got it?
You mean like where you went over to other countries and?
Yes, and helped out.
You did that.
I tried to do it. They couldn't. It was very interesting. I went to Washington. I had an appointment with the head of Save the Children. That's another organization which is still in business. And I had my dossier on the table and everything like that. She said, "You have an excellent background and some maturity, obviously." Because by then I was 30 years old. You know, so she said, "But we need people to build wells and to do agriculture and everything. We don't need music." But so and so is he. You want to meet him? He's a painter, and I got friendly with a guy from there. My point. What is my point?
We're talking about the music business and the business of music and kind of how you got involved.
Oh, okay.
With the business end of things.
And then I realized that, you know, it doesn't have to be in the guise of playing a saxophone that you can do something positive. You can be a garbage collector and still do something positive for the world. It's how you see it, not what you do, but what you see, and then what you do. And
Attitude.
yeah, attitude. And you know, then the real world caught up with me in '83. Dave Holland became the head of this program in Banff for Canada. I'm sure you know about that.
Right, sure.
It was Kenny Wheeler and Eddie Marshall, and you know, great, really high level, and great fun in the mountains. You know, it was a heavy. Can you imagine putting 8 jazz musicians in a context where they don't have to answer to anybody? The Royal Yukon Police were not allowed on the grounds.
Really?
That tells you something about the latitude that we had to be a nutcase, you know. But anyway,
And we haven't even started to discuss drugs.
well, I've been warned that I have to be very careful.
Yeah.
So that when I went with Dave, then also Aebersold, how I got with Aebersold in the late '70s, you know, he called me from out of the blue. In fact, he called me today to see how I'm doing. It's interesting. He you know, I saw that. I mean, Aebersold, this was a revelation. How you could teach a fly on the wall to play a blues. I'm triple exaggerating, but the point is that these guys, Coca, Baker, Aebersold, ABC, very interesting, and then Dan Hurley and Ed Solf and John Serling and blah blah blah. They had these massive summer workshops. I'm telling you, Bobby, did you ever do one in Aebersold? There's 450 people there. Now it's not like that anymore. In fact, it's over for Jamie.
I talked to him fairly recently, and he said he was scaling down.
Yeah,
I mean, but even 20 years ago, when I approached him, and he was very nice to me, he actually knew my playing and was very complimentary. And I said, I'd love to do what you can. But he says, I'm using the same few guys, and I'm cutting out some people. It was already kind of you hit the heyday of it.
And then Dave came through, and he hired me for Banff. So I had, I went from $400 a week to $800. That's how I measure it. What I realized, bottom line, to get serious, is that no matter what you can do to somebody, if you can get them to cool down and be honest and be appealing and being a gentleman, a gentlewoman, that you owe it to take that personality into the real world. It's a gift. And if you have a gift, you should share it. So then I said, now I had my skills in writing. I just had a good knowledge of how to write. And that's where the books came from. And there were a lot of them. Self-portrait, chromatic approach, saxophone, personal sound. I mean, it's about 20 books, different sorts. But
yeah, I know you've been very prolific.
That saved me, I tell you, because if that hadn't been there, I don't know what I would have done, because I'd done everything in music that I could do. I mean, it was just repeat. It was, it was the same dance over and over again. And I was looking for something a little bit more depth.
Right, and one thing that you managed to do that not many of us did was to actually, and you didn't do it consistently because I don't think the world allowed you to, but you did it more consistently than a lot of us did, was you actually led a band, a quartet, and traveled through the world with that same band.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, in other words, I got a duo with Walter Davis Jr., and sometimes we were a quartet, we'd pick up cats that lived in Europe already, but nobody said, here's a tour, you know what I mean, and gave us this. I mean, I was often a single with rhythm sections, and it was really interesting. And I joined a certain circle of musicians that seemed to play in the same gigs in different countries with the kind of the better house bands there. And I was in illustrious company. I mean, there was Joe Henderson and Woody Shaw and Johnny Griffin and Clark Terry, but none of these guys, I was amazed. I understood me not being able to have a band over there because I didn't have that kind of recognition. But these were guys that were on my wall when I was a kid, and they still they didn't have the backing or whatever it was to travel with a band. And you managed to do that, which I always admire that about you.
Well, in the early '80s, one thing I did see was that this thing is for real. This thing is going to only grow. And it's again, you're teaching kids how to, well, Phil Woods put it right. He said, I'd rather see a kid with a saxophone than a gun. And on our stage of civilization now, that's more true than ever before. But
There's another guy with one of those two-word kind of wits, you know. I mean, Phil had
Oh,
one of those, that generation, that sharp way of saying
unbelievable.
something. Uh,
Unbelievable. He lived in Water Gap, near where we
right
live.
in
So we had some,
Stroudsburg,
not,
yeah.
not buddy, but obviously civil conversations and once in a while serious. Although he couldn't help being his sarcastic self, but um, he was. He said it's a good story. He says, when you finish playing and you put the horn down, somebody comes over and says, "Man, the horn sounds great," and then he looks around and says, "I don't see anybody playing it." I said,
Yeah.
no, no, he holds it up. Sorry, he does one of these things. He goes like, "I don't see anybody playing it."
I don't see anybody playing it. Yeah, I mean, he one time we did this alto summit in Paris, and it was six saxophone players. It was Jackie McLean, Phil, C sharp. I got C sharp brought over.
Whoa, man!
It was my buddy. I got him, and Frank Morgan and Vincent Herring and me, with Roy Haynes, Percy Heath, and Walter Davis Jr. So we having a rehearsal. Now most of the concert, we all had our own features. We only
Yeah,
played three tunes as a as an ensemble with the five saxophones. So we played Sure Enough, Donna Lee, and Confirmation, and everything else was solos, duos, quartets. I mean, quintets. So anyway, we're rehearsing. These six alto players all together, and we decide we're going to play the head of Donna Lee. So six of us, we go, and we get through it, and it's the most raggedy ass version of Donna Lee you could imagine. You got six guys, all uniquely styled, who all have their own interpretation of how to play an eighth note. And we finish, and Phil goes, and it was a tribute to Charlie Parker. That was the big thing. It was We Were the Keepers of the Flames, and Phil goes, Flame Keepers, yep. Timekeepers,
anyway, that was a learning experience, and it made me understand that like if I could turn one kid on, who's at 18 looking for something and likes the saxophone, I've provided a service, which is what I was looking for, a service, something that I could help other people with, you know. So I finally settled on jazz education. I knew that this thing is around for going to be going on, it's going to make the rounds. The other thing was that um, uh, forget what I was saying.
the good service of being able to turn kids on to
And the
jazz
big thing was,
education.
as far as the band goes, of having a band, I knew that the way to do this was to play with European musicians. If I played with European musicians, to play with Polly Danielson, Albert Mangelsdorf, the whole legion of top, Marshall Solau, I just made 2 records with last year. Um, that was the way to ingratiate yourself into their scene, which is only right. You're a visitor. And if you're going to join a band, you're going to join with Bobo Stenson. You got to play. You got to be on the case for that, for what they do, and what they give you. But what they do also, they have their own way of playing. The guys, Scandinavian guys, have one way. At least it used to be. It's more homogenized now. But it
Right,
was
you have that kind of, but you also had your own. I mean, you traveled with Quest, for example, and were able to take four guys on the road with you. I would think when you went to Europe, you often played with them in their countries, and you might be able to take a band that already lived there.
right. That's a.
But,
But I realized that the way to do it is to play with European musicians and just play your ass off and be cool. But they want to see what you bring to the plate also, especially because I played with Miles. Playing with Miles is a ticket for the rest of your life as far as our style of life goes. And, these guys would give you their information also. So in a way, it was a very two-way street, which I enjoyed. I like that. I talk about democracy. I love it because it means that I'm getting from you and you're getting from me, and now we can talk. That's completely non-competitive. Talking, going backwards a couple of hours.
yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful way to think of it. I mean, yeah, I've there's that universal spirit of the music that's everywhere, and when you go all over the world and play, it's almost like being an evangelist. I've found that like you found people in every country. You've got your fellow evangelists, and you go and you preach with them, and then people come over. And to people that love this music, it is a religious thing in a way, that we all kind of find God in different places.
That's right.
But I mean, I learned more from Charlie Parker than from probably anything I learned from the Torah. Just to put it that way. Sorry if I offended anybody above, but
The golden rules, untouchable, will not be changed by you having an attitude about it.
yeah. Well, some other time we'll talk about Maimonides. But Michael Brecker, I mean, Mike was a good friend to both of us. He loved you. He would talk to me. And in fact, in his first interview in Downbeat, it's interesting, it was called Music is What I Do. He mentions who his favorite players are besides Coltrane and, the obvious. And he says that, of course, Dave Liebman and Steve Grossman, but there's also Bob Berg and Bob Mover. He's really good. He's with Mingus now. And I was so, happy when Mike mentioned me. We were the four guys that Mike mentioned.
That's nice.
In that article. And, can you tell me a little bit about how you met Mike and some impressions you had of him? And
well, Mike is through Randy, of course. Randy's one of my oldest friends. And he told me, he said, we were hanging out. He had a place on the 3rd Avenue in Bowery or something. And he bought my loft. I think we discussed this like that. But basically, I was older than him by a few years. And that makes a difference at that point in life.
Sure did.
I mean, it's not the same difference if you're 65 or 75 years old. That's a whole other game. But this what we have here is, a camaraderie that surpasses the competitive element in all ways, if you allow it to happen. At least if you take it in and say, man, you play great, and you play better than me. You don't have to say it. He said, you know it though when you walk into it. That's why I tell the kids they got to come to New York for 10 minutes and just see in one night 3 groups that are going to show them the width of the music now, how wide it is. And then they'll know where they stand on line. Are they in front of the line? Are they in the middle of the line? Are they in back of the line? And you got to.
As Art Farmer used to say, if you find you're the smartest cat in the room, it's time to find another room.
And of course, it also coincides with meeting my lovely wife, and having, getting married and the whole shit. I had been married before, but for a year or 2 or 3, I don't even remember, to an actress, which is not a good scene. It's not a good thing for long-term relationships, shall we say?
I understand, and that's another subject. That you've managed to have a nice family life, and you've got a beautiful daughter who's also very successful as a publicist. And that's something that a lot of musicians, as we know, it was hard for a lot of cats didn't achieve that. They've had several, a lot of stormy relationships and that type of thing. And do you think leaving New York had something to do with the longevity of your marriage, or what do you think is this? To what do you ascribe the success of your relationships?
Yeah, because it's I come from New York, so I was part of the scene. And in 81, 82, I just got completely drugged with what was going on. As I said, this was that period when I didn't like what was happening and everything. And I'm sorry again, what Bob was.
We were talking about your family, but did leaving New York have something to do with it? You had a very successful life as a family man.
I had gone to San Francisco for a year and a half, which is another side story. But I met Karis, and I could see right away that she was the one for me. You know what I mean? And plus her beauty and everything, her musicianship is exemplary. I mean, she's really a good writer. I mean, no bullshit. She's in there, and I hope she gets more back into it when she's has more time. But
so you shared that very strongly.
Yeah, I mean, by the time Lydia came, we were like, you're sitting having dinner with McCoy Tyner, because you're both at this party, etc.
Right.
So anyway, that's the story of that. Yeah,
So she could hang with you, and you guys could hang with each other.
yeah, exactly.
It really, you seem, to really.
I just don't know how you could do it without being married to a musician. I just don't. I don't know how you can do it. I mean, I tried, and it was actress was second, low second best. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's.
They have to understand what makes us do this. Pick up this thing that looks like a chain around your neck, and do it, and do all this stuff. And what all it means, like you're talking, I'm talking about the long history of what it means. When you did this, when you did that, when you did this. It's not like a 9 to 5 job. You have it until you retire. And, it's interesting in that respect.
You mean it's not? You mean relationship?
Sorry.
You mean you're talking about relationship?
Yeah, yeah.
Like a marriage is not a 9 to 5.
Yeah, you got. I mean, you can't come home to that because you're not even going to get home till 3 in the morning. So anyway, you don't even talk about getting home. You know what I mean?
Well, that's true. The other, I find a lot of musicians, besides if they're not with other musicians, a lot of the marriages that I've worked, that I've known to work, and I remarked to a friend's wife who was a nurse once. I said, there's an awful lot of musicians married to nurses, and she says that's because musicians need nurses. They don't need wives. They need nurses.
I've been hearing a lot of that lately.
Me too. Unfortunately, my wife was a nurse, and then she became a psychotherapist.
Oh.
Then she became vice president of a hospital. But but now she's back to being a nurse, which was her first profession, which she didn't do for a long time, being a therapist and an administrator. And now with my condition, here we go again. She's giving me my nebulizers and my various treatments in the course of the day, so.
How long have you been married?
This is just 5 years with her.
That's great. God bless her.
I was married to someone else, and I have 2 children who are 9 years old and 16 years old.
Still young.
And they live down the street, with my ex, who's a doctor. And
where live, by the way? Where are you talking from?
I live on Battery Park, right? I live at Gateway Plaza, where John Hendricks used to live. Right on the marina at Battery Park South. You see the water from my window. It's beautiful.
Karis loves that. Karis loves that area.
We're down at Mez on the River.
Mez on the River, the restaurant?
Yeah, I'm right above that restaurant.
They go out of business, look like they do.
No.
No, the River Grill, I think it's called, is downstairs. And Brookfield Place. You know Brookfield Place?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm right. I see it from my window. It's right across the street in the marina with the boats. You come into town, you guys got to come for dinner.
Love to, man. It
That
shows
would
you.
be great.
It's the lobby. We went
We were in the lobby waiting for
cab.
you.
We were
Yeah.
sitting in the lobby waiting for the cab.
Right.
Remember?
No, I do remember that. Gotta let me sit in the chair.
Yeah, Mez on the River.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, that's what we. Yeah, so that's where we are, and I just have 1 or 2 other things. I know we're getting a little bit, it's an intense conversation. So, but I'm enjoying it so much. I have just a couple other things I was thinking. When you talked about that age difference thing, it reminded me of like when I first was in the city on a regular basis. I knew Mike from Phil Woods' camp, and so I started hanging with Mike, and that's how I met you. He brought me to a late night session at the Village Gate that you guys were doing. I think it was around 1969.
Oh, yeah.
Does that sound right?
Year-wise, I don't remember it per se. But
Well, it was like after hours at the gate. Everybody would be blowing. You guys were playing like almost like Ascension style, post Love Supreme Coltrane stuff. Alan Schwartzberg and
Oh, Alan Schwartzer, that's a Catskills. Now we have the Catskill connection.
right, but he was jamming with you guys. I remember he was down there, and some of the guys that played with Dreams. It was
Yeah.
around the time that Randy and Mike had Dreams, and but it was funny because Mike was about 2.5 years older than me, so he was about 19 or 20, and you were a couple of years older than Mike, so you were about 23 or something like that, and I was 17, and so it was like playing with the big boys. It was like it was like being in elementary school, like I was a second grader and you guys were the 6th graders, and and I would sit there and I might get up and play a little bit, but it was mostly I was there to hear the big guys.
Well,
The
I,
big
you know, the Catskill connection is a whole other story about. I mean, I spent every summer for 5 years in the Catskills. We go
You
doing
played in the Catskills for those.
playing three bands. There was a Latin band, Larry Harlow. There was a show band, Cy something or other, and there was a lounge band, which was me with the future Questerians, and
Future Questerians.
yeah, future like
Was this like Kutcher's and Grossingers and these kind of places, or
yes, 100 miles north, and Grossinger's was the biggest. And the other one was called the Concord, which
the Concord? I remember that. Yeah.
had a building that was like wrapped around something. It was very avant-garde at the time. But this is where really I heard jazz. I mean, besides going and hearing Miles or something like that in New York, what you had was, you got schooled by the jam session, which was Thursday night at the Homowac. It was in Ellenville. And you guys waited online. We were dressed in suits because the gig ended at midnight. Everybody gathered once a week. They let the nightclub open, and it's the first time I got killed because I went on stage. I got on stage. Somehow I got through it. Maybe because they feel sorry for me or something. I said, "Oh, this guy's he must have been through the Vietnam War," something like that. And you got to hear some real Arnie Lawrence.
Oh, I love Arnie. Good buddies.
Connie Perillo, drummer, who was extraordinary, ended up teaching, 8-year-old kids. Schwartzberg, what's his name? Skinny guy, tall guy. Anyway, this was more like the schooling because those guys they were all predominantly white, and studio. They were in studio work or doing it. The '60s was big with studio work.
Oh yeah, I remember Jim and Andy's. And a special phone in Jim and Andy's for if somebody needed a trombone player. They'd say, "Anybody got a trombone player in there?" And they'd say, "Trombone player needed."
Take my vodka, but I'll be back later. And probably within an hour because it's a jingles and they're all only allowed an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
I looked at them and I go, well, like, what are they doing? They said, they're drinking, brother. What the hell's wrong with you? Don't you understand? That's not clear water. That's vodka.
That's vodka they're drinking there. Yeah. They used to, Al Cohn used to buy me a wine spritzer, a red wine spritzer. I was like 16. And he'd say, here, quietly, you can drink this. It looks like a Coca-Cola. And so I'd be drinking it at Jim and Andy's. I'd have a little red wine spritzer there. And, but anyway, no, you were talking about the Catskills and the guys that worked the studios. We were talking about that. New York had this very active studio scene in those days. People had 2 gigs a day, right?
So, the synthesizer came in and basically took the work. Like this artificial intelligence, they're going to come and take the work. You know what I mean? We're at the same point again with
yeah, that's now you never did that though. You didn't do much of that, as far as I know.
I did two of them, 2 dates. I did one, and one was funny. John Simon, who produced Dylan and the band, was a producer, and he was doing a record with Michael Franks. And they called me, and because I knew Simon from a place called Lookout Farm. That whole story is upstate New York and Napanock. Anyway,
that's how you got the name Lookout Farm for the band.
Yeah, because of this place. This artist Eugene Gregan was very influential in me and Richie's state of mind, shall we say, from getting high to praying, and. But that's where I was making a living at 13 years old. I was playing on a weekend. I had 3 tuxedos. I would say I had a silver, a white, and a black tuxedo. 13-year-old kid who had to go with somebody else's name because working papers you can only be 16. You couldn't do it. You're against the law. I was Mike Shore. That was my name for the whole summer.
Mike Shore.
Shore, SHOR or something like that.
That's funny. But now you did the Michael Franks date.
Oh yeah, fine. Let me finish it.
Yeah.
Go in. It's C minor, pentatonic, whatever. I don't even know what it was called in those days. And I played a couple of notes off the scale, like I do now, but probably with much more bravado involved. And he didn't say anything, but he said, "Could you try it again?" I said, "What are you looking for?" He said, "Oh, it's okay, nothing. Dare they step on my toes, right?" And the record, Selden Powell became the flute player on the record. That was interesting. I was not suitable for studio work because
You were not what?
it's not suitable for studio work because I would like to change things. I don't want to repeat the same thing. It was like a mania. Don't repeat. You made a sin if you repeat it, which is ridiculous. But there was there was a place for that when it could be useful.
So, and also you weren't really. I know you play some flute, but you weren't really like what one would consider like a serious doubler, like let's say George Young or somebody like that.
Young is very interesting because he lived in Stroudsburg for years. I don't think we did meet the Barone thing, but
Yeah, George brought me around to. He was doing a show called Pearly Victorious when I was 16. George heard me at a jam session and kind of took me under his wing, and we hung out. And he brought me to various studio dates that he was doing because he said I should be a doubler, which is what my father wanted me to be. And I said I just want to play the alto saxophone. I mean, when they say Yasha Heifetz, they say, "Hey Yasha, did you bring your viola? Or did you bring your cello?" No, he plays the violin. So I wanted to do that, and I didn't have any interest in the same way. I don't like to repeat myself either. And the idea of playing the same music every night the same way was like I might as well be in prison.
thank you.
So
Exactly. Well put.
So I felt I wanted to do this, but George helped me understand that because I watched him do that.
He was in this band. He was in this section that I'm talking
Well, he
about.
would be in various sections. We'd hang out at Jimmy. He'd get a call for a date. He'd say, "You want to come up? I'm doing a jingle for such and such. You want to watch?" And Danny Bank would be there, and like great musicians, and perfectly played everything. The admiration I had for these guys' musicianship was off the charts. But I never. The more I saw this, the more I said, "You know what? I don't want to do this. I'm going to go hang out with Zoot and see what he's got to." It was they were beautiful people too, but it was not my life. It was not my scene. So I know you
Talk
see
about alcohol. Talk about alcohol consumption.
Oh, alcohol consumption, yes. Al,
Jim and Andy. I mean, I was too young to drink, but I'd go in there and it'd be like a lot of guys talking and conversing, and then they'd pull out this like, "I gotta go work. I'll be back." They didn't want to go home. They wanted to keep the party going.
Oh yeah, there was it was a constant party, and Jim and Andy's. All these guys were hanging out, and I mean, when you think about it, man, you'd look over at one table, and there was Clark Terry and Snooky Young, talking, and Al Porcino walks in. Another table, you've got like and Selden Powell, cats like that who people don't know anymore. Jerome Richardson, all those guys would be in Jim and Andy's, and I was 16-year-old kid. I couldn't believe it. Like this kind of scene existed. It was just fantastic. So I think having absorbed that, that's also that camaraderie thing.
Yes, and it's a very New York thing because of the numbers, the amount of people, the amount of musicians that were around at that time. I mean, it was really a lot of people. So it seemed to me that it was like this place is brimming with musicians.
Yeah, that's so true, Dave. One day I was walking down up Broadway or 7th Avenue with Albert Daly. Albert, for those of you who don't know it, I think he's one of the greatest pianists ever. Never got his due either. He didn't find a slot for him.
He wrote a great tune, like an eighth note tune.
Daily Double, one of those. He wrote a few good tunes, and nobody. I'm trying to find the music, man. I don't know what happened to them. He didn't even record some of them. But anyway, walking down the street, and we ran into Ronnie Cubert. And then the three of us start walking and talking, and then there's Eddie Palmieri. And then we're sitting there on the street corner. We all stop and have this wonderful conversation, the four of us. And Albert starts laughing, and he looks up to God, he looks up to the heavens, and he says, "You know what, man? I love this city." I said, "What do you mean?" Yeah, he said, "Where else in the world are you going to find all this talent on one street corner?"
On a Wednesday afternoon.
On a Wednesday afternoon. And I said, "You know what, Albert? That's true, but you know what? There's 3 other street corners in New York right now with just as much talent on them." At least. There could be 5 others. So, that diversity too of cats. I mean, I remember like hearing you guys play that crazy shit over at the Village Gate, after hours. But I think I'd just come, from listening to Roy Eldridge or Bud Johnson or something. So on the same night, I could hear Bud Johnson and Dave Liebman and Brecker and you guys playing something else, and it just gave you a broad palette. I think that you have that we have. We're fortunate to have had that. I think.
Yes, yes. Well, we definitely are. The timing was perfect, and we had the best party of all time, man.
Yeah.
We made Rome look like it was like a slot on a mailbox. I mean, we were partying, man. We were all partying like pleasantly and unpleasantly, and some of the casualties of war. And then there were some who retired, as you did, and we came back. And you have something to relate to people when you've been through that. They feel it. They feel it. They feel something. They don't know. They don't know if they feel red or green, but they feel he's talking about something up there.
He's talking about. You mean?
Musically, just what you offer the audience, what you're really doing in the end is playing for people. And no matter what your attitude is, you are playing for people. So you have to take them into consideration. Now that doesn't mean you have to ingratiate yourself to it, but you have to realize that I'm here to communicate. I'm getting paid to communicate.
Well, I think that dancing thing that you were talking about earlier, that we were talking about, even if you did it on a club date in the Catskills, you got the feeling and the experience of playing for people.
Yep.
Even if it was that, and that carried into your jazz playing, that carried into our feeling. We were not just playing academically. I think one of the problems with jazz education being so formalized, and unfortunately it's not the fault of the schools, it's not the fault of the kids, but there aren't situations to go out and apply what you're learning to real people and see how they react to it. Yeah. So, there's not quite enough of that. And, lastly, before we split, I was thinking about, the whole thing, like you mentioned, getting high and listening to the train and that being a very formative thing. And, the pros and cons of drugs. I got to be a little bit friendly with Nellie Monk, with Thelonious's wife. I never knew Monk. I never really knew him. I'd been in the same room with him, but I'd never talked to her or anything. But afterwards, I wrote a letter when Ken Burns Jazz came. I wrote a real diatribe about what a travesty this thing was. And that leads to a long story with Hank Jones, which I won't go into, but he agreed. And another friend of mine, Brooks Kerr, said, well, who really hated it was Nellie Monk. You should call Nellie, because you guys could commiserate over that. And so I said, you know what, I've always wanted to talk to her anyway. He said, oh, you should call her. She's a really nice woman. So we kind of had a friendship. And so I'm calling her, and I said, she's talking about the Ken Burns thing. She says, where they got to bebop, she said, when they got to these people, she made them all like they were just a bunch of freaks, a bunch of like crazy people that should be locked up in an insane asylum. What they missed the whole fact that we was having fun. It was so much fun. There were drugs. Yes, there were some terrible tragedies like Fats Navarro and Ernie Henry and even Byrne. But boy, did we have a ball.
I agree. I think we had the best time in the history of entertainment. Because if you go from 1920 to 2000, basically in 80 to 100 years, you got everything in there. And, which is a little bit of a problem. Like today, in fact, I was listening to the train at the Village Gate. That just came out. It's with Eric and Elvin. Unbelievable. Favorite things, when lights are low, when lamps low.
Eddie Carter's too.
Yeah. And I just listened to this, and Eric and Elvin sounds unbelievable. And I just said to myself, what the hell did I do to get involved with this? With these guys around that have such an amazing talent. I mean, just today, I was just listening in the morning. I don't listen that much to music, but they were so good. They were so good. They are so good. The more you get older, the more you appreciate how great these guys were. To the man, to name 20 guys that are exemplary in where they play and what they play. And we've been chasing that shit since we were 14 years old.
That's right.
Chasing the train. That's what it is.
Chasing the train, and I was chasing Bird. Joe Farrell used to call me Chirp. Sometimes we did this little record date together, and I played the solo, and I squeaked. I chirped. He said that wasn't a squeak. That was a chirp. Don't worry.
A musical contribution.
He says, Bird chirped. Bird chirped. So then he would say, you're a chirp off the old bird. And then he called me Chirp sometimes. Say, hey, Chirp, come over here. and that became my nickname to Joe, not to anybody else. But but I felt, well, that's right. I've been chasing him, and then and we've tried to find ways to play all of our influences and put them together. I thought it was interesting to find the commonality between Bird, Sonny Rollins, and Lee Konitz, and Warren, and that kind of style. And how would they all sound if they were one guy? you know, and,
That's good. I gotta remember. That's a good one.
and they played alto. So that's why you guys love me too, because I was not competitive because I was one of the only alto players out there. You guys were all tenor players, and I kind of brought. Also, I got my Coltrane from you. Somebody said you sound like Train sometimes. You get a Coltrane-ish influence in there, but you don't sound like Train. I said, well, I got my Coltrane through osmosis. I played these jam sessions with you and Mike and Steve and Berg and Jerry Bergonzi, these people, and I got so much of that influence from the way you guys played that. And of course, I listened to Train too. We were all listening to that. But we did catch a wonderful period of music, and now we're the old guys, we're the elders, and all we can do is hope to be half as I just hope to be half as half the human being that most of those guys were.
That's for sure. It gives you a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, it does, and
it's definitely uplifting. There's no question about it. It's obvious, and when it's done with the excellence that we're talking about, it's just inescapable as a body of music, as a form. Swing, Dixieland, Indian classical music, blah blah blah. You name it and all. But there's nothing like a jazz group swinging and feeling good, and everybody just having a great time.
Yeah, which reminds me of a story. I'll just tell for a minute that when I met Bill Evans, I was doubtful. I was hanging out in New England Conservatory, and some of the cats had given some concerts, and it was 1970, and I was playing with Jackie Byard, and they said they didn't want me, not Jackie, but some of the students there gave like a Charlie Parker concert, and they said, I said, I should play at it. I'm jamming with you guys and this and that. No, this is only black people. This concert, you can't play at this concert because, and then some guys would even say, hey, why don't you, don't mess with our music. I mean, why don't you play Beethoven and Bach? That's your music. Let's keep it like that. And of course, like Miles knew there's no color to that shit and everything. But I was 18 and I'm sitting there and I said, you know what? I went to hear Bill Evans and I decided I'll talk to Bill Evans. I'm going to ask him about it. And I said, Bill, have you ever, I'm getting through this racial thing. Sometimes it's really kind of a drag. So he says, oh, I've experienced that on different levels, both as an amateur and professional, different things. He said, but in fact, when I went to college in Louisiana, I was a flute major and I was going to be a classical flautist. He said, I played piano and I thought of that, but that was what I thought I was going to be doing perhaps because of that reason. I felt that I'd gone and sat in, played jazz, but I sometimes got that kind of reaction. And I said, so you know what I mean? He said, oh, very well. I said, well, what was it, Bill, that made you, decide finally not to be a classical musician and to play jazz? And Bill get this reflective look for a minute, and he'd like really take his time. And he scratched his chin for a second. He said, I think, man, that New Jersey accent too. I think, man, it depends upon your need to swing. He said, because classical music will give you a lot of gratification and a lot of satisfaction, but there's a certain thing, there's swing, and only jazz can do that for you. So you should think very hard about how much you love and need to swing. And if you don't feel that, then you're not a jazz musician.
Yeah. Well said, bro.
Yeah. So on that note, I think we've covered quite a bit today, and I really appreciate, as always, talking to you, Dave.
You too. You're very informed, as you know, and we do come from the same period of this music. So that's a kinship that is, you can't create that. That's the luck of the birth. But
yeah, we're part of that same period, and we're still creating. I mean, in fact, just to before we close completely, what you got some recent things? I know you've had some health problems like I have. Are any? I've had to stop performing in a lot of ways, and I'm high risk, and I don't want to go out to crowds, and I'm like the boy in the bubble myself. But I'm still playing in my house. I have cats come over and play, and that's another thing. And I'm working on a string and orchestra record, as I told you. But what are you up to musically?
Well, right now I'm going through a little time off to collect, but the last 3 months have been the busiest I've ever been. My calendar, I could hardly read the calendar after I made corrections and things. Just everything, all the dubs, like with electronic guys, and guys with me and Sam Newsom duo. We did a record
Oh,
that's out. It's
the duo, just the two of you, just two saxophones?
his playing.
Yeah, he's a great player.
Unbelievable.
His soprano playing is especially nice.
Yes, that's what he's doing now. And I just had a very, like a couple of records and everything. I've been very busy. Now there's some time off, which I need to collect my thoughts, see what the next stage is going to be. I just booked Smalls today. I want to get a new group together. I have to have a group, and I'll debut it there in March. We just did this right before you came.
Oh, that's great. So,
You
were you
know,
playing with some younger cats, or
well, my son-in-law, first of all, and bass player Nick, I don't know his last name, I can't pronounce it, Woodziak, something like that. Fantastic bass player, unbelievable. And Peter Evans, trumpet player. I don't know if you know him, but he's incredible, technical and everything. So that's what it is. I mean, things have definitely slowed down, and time limit. Yeah,
ah,
things have definitely slowed down, and I hope we all have to kind of gird ourselves for the inevitable.
well, that's true. I mean, and
Dealing, let's put it this way, dealing with the next stage of life or death. I think about it, and anybody I talk to, most people who I talk to are on my wavelength, also think about it, and need to talk to somebody about it. Usually, somebody means somebody like you with me. It can't be more than 10 years apart because that means you're a different generation. I mean, what made Quest tick was because we all referred to Bill Evans Trio, Miles and Wayne, and we were, into that basket. We all were. So when we come together, we talk like about that the good old times. Plug Nickel, Miles in Europe, etc.
right,
So, our taste has been built in the same way into the same longevity aspect, which we hope will be
what
done.
Lee Konitz used to call affinity.
Infinity, yeah.
To have an affinity for the same things. Like Lee used to say, he said he felt that we were, even though we were 30 years apart or something like that, Lee and I, he said, there's no difference. We have an affinity for all the same things. And that's what makes us ageless with each other in a way, that we would have that. I was going to ask you too, just one thing. Did you get to know Wayne when you were with Miles and stuff? I imagine that Wayne and Herbie and those guys would ever come to listen. Was there any interaction or contact with that or not?
This is the '70s and before Miles retired, so to say, temporary retirement. L.A. What's the name? Wayne was. I met Wayne in L.A. I said, "Oh, you sound great." Blah blah blah. But Herbie, I never saw him on a gig, not the gigs that I was doing. Wayne was as mysterious as he is beautiful. He's a Zen master. He's beyond master. He's like the shit. That stuff. That's that stuff that starts at the 50th floor, and then you have to go up to 150 flights. You know what I mean? That's like what it's about. He was really created a mystery just by being himself. And of course
Yeah.
he had, much like Sonny and Miles, particularly these three, they had their stages when they were, that Miles' stage is obvious. They were common likes and dislikes during the stages, and they were there to record and to be seen doing that. And they were, for us, they were who made you interested in playing like if I Rebel from Plug Nickel, something like that. This is watching the masters play and being able to have somebody to relate to with you on the side. You need a partner in crime. That's what I always say. You need to have somebody with you when you're doing this stage, this learning stage. After that, you're on your own.
Well, it eliminates a lot of verbosity
Yeah.
when you've got, you know what I mean, when you know that the whole band has an innate understanding of the objective of what you're trying to do. You know, I think one of those short little things that Miles said, another great comment when they said to him once, how do you pick the people in your band? And he said something to the effect of like, I try to get the cats I don't have to talk to. You know, I don't have to explain anything to.
I got one from Miles. Finish before you're done.
Finish before you're done.
That's going into the century, you know, because how
Yeah,
can you finish? How can you finish if you're not done yet? But yet there's a way of looking at the last two bars of a turnaround and not making it cliched. I mean, I'm taking it to that. This is after 40 years of trying to figure out what the hell he's talking about. But you know, just like these guys were, blessed, and we were fortunate to have had them, really.
we were. Anyway, we're fortunate to have each other still. I'm happy about that. And I guess we kind of have run the gamut of conversation for today. And I really appreciate having Dave as a guest. It's been great, 2 weeks in a row. And, you know, we'll probably do some more at some point.
Oh, there is my band and my music from post Miles. I mean, up to Miles is a stage. It was my learning. That was at graduate school and a master's degree. And
like I mentioned, you know, the Battle Roy and the Lookout Farm Band. And where's Jeff Williams these days?
He splits his time between New York and London. He's married to a very famous author, Lionel, I forget her name, but in fact, we are releasing a duo with him in 1990 that we did and found the tape to, and he's got a label to release it. Just me and him. Burning. I mean,
man, that'd be beautiful. I got to play with him quite a bit too in Boston.
Yeah, he's great.
Great guy, and he had that nice loft we used to jam in too. He was another loft guy, as I recall, downtown. He had a place. Anyway, we better go. And once again, I thank Dave, and I thank anyone who's tuned into this and will ever watch this. And I hope you liked it.
Is this catalog?
What's that?
Is this cataloged? I mean, or archived, or is this?
Yeah, we're going to archive it and catalog it, and if we ever monetize it, we'll straighten you out too.
No, I'm just curious.
No,
you've had a couple of illustrious people in, I'm sure.
Yeah, and actually, next week we've got a younger person, Grant Stewart, who's one of the finer tenor players in the world and New York, of course. And Micah Benny is going to be with us the week after that.
Good, great guy.
Yeah, wonderful cat. So I'm looking forward to both of those things.
He's got stories.
McPherson's coming up. I talked to him yesterday. He wants to do one of these. So
who's that? I'm sorry.
Charles McPherson.
Oh, yeah, well, you and him, actually a very common thread between you and him, alto.
Yeah, well, I replaced him in Mingus's band. He coached me, and he'd tell me things like, "Give Mingus a little more Johnny Hodges. Don't just stay with Bird. Get into Johnny Hodges. Mingus likes to hear that Johnny Hodges."
That's a good point.
You know, and he's been a friend and an influence for years. In fact, one thing about Charles, I know we can go on and on, but when it was found out that I had emphysema, I came back. I found out in Belgium, and I had told somebody that I don't know, somehow the word got out that I had emphysema. And when I got back to America, after having just been diagnosed with emphysema, I get a call from Charles McPherson. Somebody said, Charles McPherson called you. I said, really? And I said, well, let me call him back. I said, Charles, you called. He said, oh man, I heard you have emphysema, Bobby. How bad is it and what's happening? And he was the first person to call me about that, which I thought was beautiful.
He's a sweetheart. Just a little, I've been around him. He's just so kind.
He's one of those guys too, you know, he's the generation a little bit after the second generation but he was right close to all that too, you know, so it's a certain attitude that we hope that we have, but at least part of that. What we
have an attitude for sure.
We have an attitude, yeah, right.
And it's positive and negatives.
I would say.
In all its beautiful glory.
Thank you, everyone, for dropping by and honing in on us as we hone in on each other. And if you did enjoy this and like this, you can give us a like. I'm kind of computer illiterate, but I think you would say Bob Mover Jazzability .com.
That's it.
And that's it. And we thank you for tuning in to On the Real Side. That's the name of this program, which is our podcast. And once again, thank you very much, Mr. Dave Liebman, for your wonderful presence.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Take care of your health and just be good. Be good.
Yeah, and give my love to Karis.
All right,
I don't know Lydia, but you can send that into. All right, you take care too, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, and we thank Jessy Kaiser, by the
Jessy,
way. Also,
thank
if
you.
you're wondering who this lady is, she appeared a little while back.
Switch
Jessy,
on.
I couldn't do this. We couldn't do this without Jessy. She is the main force behind this whole podcast idea and helps with all the technical things. And she's my right hand. What do they call it? Girl.
Aid to camp.
Major domo, is that what they call it?
Yes.
Yeah, I wondered if there would be a minor domo,
Wouldn't mind hearing that.
a diminished domo,
There you go. Now we're getting deep.
an augmented domo.
A little deep.
That's somebody who really helps you out.
We're
He's
good,
not
brother.
the major domo. He's an augmented domo.
It's a pleasure, but
All right.
Your help, Jessy. Thank you.
Better go before puns take over everything. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good night. God bless you.
Good night,
And,
brother.
thanks again.